Hey there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. This is the fourth video in our Wix Tables series, and today we're going to be talking about how to add a search bar or drop-down filters for a Wix table using Velo code. So if you're interested in learning how to do that, let's get started. So to get started with filters, let's start with a very simple drop-down filter like the one that we set up in the node code demonstration. And let's show how to do something like that using Velo. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in an input element. And that input is going to be a drop-down. Okay. And this drop-down is going to be a drop-down for gender, like the one that we had before. So actually, to save time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy our dropdown from above. So we have this dropdown here, which is just a gender dropdown. And I'm going to paste it right over here. If you have no idea what's going on here so far, then this video is part of a series, so you might want to check out the other videos in the series as well. But if you're feeling very spontaneous and you understand what I'm saying, then just continue along. So we have this gender dropdown. I'm going to go into my Velo code, and I'm going to name it gender dropdown. And basically what we want to do is when this dropdown changes, we want to filter our data. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function filter. And this function is going to run when we change the gender dropdown. So I'm going to add an on change for the gender dropdown. So gender dropdown dot on change, and we're going to run this filter. And this filter can take in the event, and then we can say const filter value equals to event dot target dot value. Okay, because this an on change event automatically passes in an event parameter to the function that it's calling. Okay, that's automatic. And we can choose to either use it or not use it. Okay, so we have this event and the target and the value. And basically now what we want to do is to filter our data. And in order to do that, we are going to have to change how this data is retrieved from our callback function. So we talked previously. Let me just do a brief recap, even if you did see the video. Maybe it was yesterday, maybe you forgot. So basically, we talked about two ways to populate the table with data from using Velo. And one was just to set the columns and rows and use Wix data to do the fetching of the data and then set everything up manually. So that's one option. And the other option was using the Datafetcher callback function, which basically defines how to fetch new data whenever we execute pagination, and that way we don't have to load all our data at once. In general, it's kind of the more efficient approach. And if we want to set a filter, basically what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make a change to this query, which is fetching our data. Okay, and we could, so for this approach, for approach number one, we could filter at 2 points. We could filter at the point where we're actually fetching the data, so we can query for different data based on the filter. And we can also insert our filter in the middle. So after we fetch our data, we can essentially set up a filter using just the filter method for arrays and filter them based on a certain property or something like that. So those are the two options that we would have if we were doing method A. And with method B, which is the data fetcher, we really are pretty much limited to doing it when we're fetching the data, but technically we could also put a filter in between the table data here and when we pass it over here, but then we would get kind of like, it would be very, what's the word that I'm looking for? Oh man. Basically, the rows would not be equal. If you know what word I'm thinking about, you could put it in the comments. Yeah, so I'm just gonna show how to do it here inside of the row retrieval function, because I think that is probably what most people would use. And this is also what's gonna help us the most for the scenario where we're fetching data from a third party, I think, but maybe not. Okay, so basically now that we have our filter values set, we're going to need to basically adjust this query based on the filter value. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a global variable. So let's say, again, here there are different approaches that we can take, but I'm going to define a global variable. So I'm going to say let filter. And okay, because we also have a function here, so filter value. And then here, instead of saying constant, I'm just going to assign this filter value to the global variable. And then here, inside of our mock data query result, I'm going to have an if statement. So I'm going to say if filter value, then I'm going to have a different query. Okay, so I'm going to go over here. And here, inside of the query, I'm going to say, let's say equals. And here we're going to have gender. And we're going to have the filter value. And here, again, so now I'm doing it very generically because I'm assuming that I only have one dropdown, and that dropdown is for the gender filter. I'll talk soon in a moment of how we might approach this if we had multiple dropdowns with multiple filters. But for now, I'm just taking the single approach just to show the generally how this would be done. And here we can have else, and we'll have this over here. Cool. And what we could do is say let mock data query results, and then assign them in here. Okay, so basically what's going to happen is if we have a filter value, then we're going to execute a specific query that matches our filter. If we don't have a filter value, then we are going to just do our regular query like we had from before, okay, which I demonstrated in the previous video. And in order for this to work, we're going to have to refresh the table. So if I go back here to the table documentation, and we go over here to refresh, then it fetches the most current data and updates the table, which I'm assuming means runs the Datafetcher table, because we saw that the Datafetch callback, it runs when the table first loads as well. So I'm assuming that it'll also be called on refresh. There's a bit of an assumption here on my part, but we're going to find out in a moment if that assumption is true. So then I'm just going to have here table.refresh. Awesome. So I think that should do it. Let's try it out. So I'm going to go here into preview mode. And whenever we're going into preview mode, that's when you have a chance to like the video, contemplate what we're talking about, subscribe to the channel. And yeah, so here you can see our table. And so basically this is how we had set it up, that there's 10 values on 10 rows on each page, and it's showing all 1,000. You can kind of move between all 1,000 rows via our 100 pages here. And now let's test out. So here you can see there's a mix between male and female at the moment. And let's see what happens when I change this. So I'm going to go and choose just male. And you can see here that the data refreshed, and now all of the genders here are male. Okay, and there are still 10 items. Okay, so it's not like it just kind of removed the females and then we had like 6 items left or something like that. It completely refetched the data based on our new query. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's 10 here. Trust me. And if I change this to female, then it'll run the query again and get all the females. Okay, so that's like the basics of how to set up a filter. And we could also set up like a button, which will clear the filters. So I can just go button. And this button could be clear filter, clear filters. And let's call this the clear filter button. And when this is clicked, so let's add an on click for it. Clear filter button dot on click. Basically what we're going to do is we're just going to say that the filter value is equal to null, okay, or nothing, and we're going to refresh the table. So table dot refresh. Awesome. And let's try and check that out in preview mode. So, okay, so we have our table, choosing a gender, male, and clear filters, and our filter is cleared. You can see now that there are male and female here. Okay, so that's the basics of how to set up a drop-down filter using Velo code with a table. Obviously, if you have multiple filters, then you'll have to manage their different values, possibly in separate variables, and you'll have to create kind of more complex approach for how you determine which queries, which fields in the query you're going to be refining and stuff like that. But this is the general approach. Okay, this is how it's done in general. One more thing that I really want to show, which is the kind of the advantage of using Velo here, is that we can also incorporate search or filtering by text input. So let's go ahead and move these two aside here. And I'm going to add a text input. So let's go down here and let's look for input, text input. And I'm going to also add a search button. Let's add a blue button. This is going to be search. So let's change this to search. And here we're just going to say enter search term. And let's rename these inputs. This will be the search query input. And this will be the search button. Awesome. So let's create a new function. And this function will be search. Search. And it's going to also take an event. Is it going to take an event? No, it won't take an event. We could say const, and here on top, sorry, I'm going to define let search query. And here I am going to say search query equals to search query input dot value. And I'm going to refresh the table like we did before. Table dot refresh. And this function is going to run when we click the button. So I'm going to add the on click for the button. So search button dot on click and search. Obviously, the code is kind of a mess now. This would have to undergo some cleanup later on. But just for the purposes of demonstration, so this is the new code that we added. Search. This is, yeah, we can kind of put these up here just that they're with their filter function. Try and keep things like somewhat organized here. Awesome. And now what we need to do is we need to define what the mock query result will be if we have a search term. Okay, so for now, I'm gonna disregard the filtering just for the sake of simplicity. And I'm just gonna change this out for search query. Okay, so if we have a search query, what do we wanna do? So basically, we want to see if any of our fields have that search query. And in order to do that, so we could go ahead and define each field individually. So for example, Wix data dot query dot, and then here, instead of equals, we can have, for example, contains. And here we're going to have the search query. And then it'll search for all the items where the gender contains our search query. But we might also want to expand this to first name and etc. So you might think that what we can do is just add here contains and then add in first name and then add the search query. But the way that Wix query works is that this will actually limit our query. Okay, so it's going to look for things that are also gender search query and also first name contains the search query, which is not what we want. We actually want to string together these queries using an OR method. And the way we can do that is we can say const gender query equals, and then we can say Wix data dot query mock data dot contains, and then here we can have our gender search query. And then we can do the same for const first name query equals to, and have something very, very similar, but here instead of gender, it'll be first name. Okay, and let's just set up another one, let's say for last name. Last name. And this will be, okay, here I didn't, this you need to make sure to put the right field, which I did not do. So this is first name. And you can see the fields. You can see the fields over here. Okay, these are and you can even copy over the field IDs. So this is how they need to look. And this is last name. And now we need to string these queries together. So we're going to say mock data query results equals await. And then we can say await gender query. And then we have here .or first name query, and then .or last name query, and we can keep on going on and adding. And then we have to not forget our .limit, .skip, .find. We can also put those each on an individual line just for aesthetic purposes. And awesome. So that should be enough to do what we want to do. The only thing I'm going to add is in our clear filter button. Clear filter, where was that? Clear filter button, dot on click. So in addition to clearing filter value, I'm also going to clear the search query value. And awesome. So let's go ahead and go into preview mode. And as you remember, this is your time to like the video and subscribe to the channel and leave awesome comments with your questions. If they're very complex questions, then I would recommend going to the wixwiz.com/forum and posting them over there. Okay, let's try our search terms now. So I'm going to just search for Bob and go ahead and search. Yeah, okay, so here you can see people, first name includes Bob. Let's try just SE, search. Cool, and here we have people, they have SE in the last name, SE first name. And I did contains, but you could also do, let's say, starts with. And that would limit it to people whose name, let's say, starts with those letters, because you assume that people search kind of from the beginning of the name, but not necessarily. So, you might want to allow this. Cool. And then you can add an email. You can add in, basically, this is how you would add search to a table. So that's cool and awesome. So just to wrap up what we did here today, we talked a bit about filters in tables, and we talked about searching tables, both using Velo code. We talked about several approaches to this, including when you filter the data, if you're filtering it when you're fetching the data, or if you're filtering it later on. For example, here, we could have taken the table data and then just added here dot filter, and then added in here item, item dot gender is equal to filter value, something like that. Okay, so that would have filtered it after we fetch the data. That's another approach that could potentially be taken depending on your use case. But this is really where we did the main demonstration. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time for the last chapter of this series, which will be talking about how to do everything that we've done until now, just using data from a third-party source, which is not a Wix collection. So if you're interested in seeing that, stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.